Hi guys, welcome back to another video for PSO Blueburst. So today what I want to do is basically a video that's aimed more towards people who might be checking out PSO for the first time. Now I have done some various videos for PSO that are aimed at new players, so I have done things like a beginner's guide, I've done guides to mags, I've done individual character class guides as well. What I want to do in this video is basically, from the view of someone who may not have played PSO before, trying to kind of relate some of the character classes to classes that you might find in other kind of online games to try and help you decide on what class might be the best for you. Because every class in PSO has its own defined strengths and weaknesses, its own special abilities that it has, and trying to find a class that suits your playstyle might be a little bit difficult if you're just going into it for the first time. So what I want to do is basically break down how each of the classes kind of play and hopefully help you try and decide on what class you want to go with for your first character. So when you load into PSO and you go to create your first character, the first thing you'd be greeted with is this screen here. And the first decision you've got to make is which class archetype you want to go with, which is either Hunter, Ranger, or Force. Now, the easy way to describe these, your Hunters are predominantly melee focused, so these are going to be getting in close to the enemies, hitting them with high attack power melee weapons, and generally staying right up in the enemy's face. So that's generally how Hunter works. This is simplifying it a lot, but that is the general idea of Hunter. Just remember that you're basically a melee class. With Ranger, as the name suggests, you are more focused towards using firearms. So you will typically stay at a kind of mid to long range with a lot of weapons. And it's rare that you'll get right up close to enemies. There are situations where you will, but typically you'll stay back a little bit and hit things with guns. And then finally we have Force. Force, to put a simple term on it, is basically the PSO equivalent of a mage. So they use what other games would probably determine to be magic. So in PSO, magic is called techniques, and forces are the ones that are most adept at using that. Some of them are able to tie that in with other abilities as well. Some of them are very, very tech focused. So we'll go into that as we get into the individual character classes. So again, just to reiterate, if you're wanting really complicated details on each of the classes and a total breakdown of each class, I do have individual class guides for every single class in PSO. So feel free to go and check those out. They will go into a lot more detail than I'm going to go into here. But this is just basically to help out someone who might be starting the game for the first time, just to try and kind of point them in the right direction of what they might want to be looking for. So if you were coming to this as a new player, what you might do is you might read these descriptions that it gives you for each of the archetypes. So we'll start with Hunter. So Hunter, it is proficient with bladed weapons. Hunters can also use a wide variety of other weapons. Although lacking in accuracy, they gain high attack power, suitable for beginners. Now this is a massive overgeneralization, and it's the same for all of these information things it does here. They are very, very generalized because for me, who's played the game for a long time, there's lots of faults I can pick with this. First one is, so when it says they could use a wide variety of other weapons, it's generally meaning that they can use some firearms as well. And there are some hunters who also use some techniques. Whether you want to use techniques with the hunter is going to vary a lot on depending on which hunter you're playing. But some of them do have the ability to use techniques as well. Obviously nowhere near to the effectiveness of a force though. Next thing it says is, although lacking in accuracy, this I do take a bit of an issue with. I think the reason it says this is because this is probably the same text that was used in the Dreamcast version. And in the Dreamcast version, hunters kind of do lack for accuracy. But in the GameCube onwards, and including Blueburst, we got a new hunter, which is Hucasil, and Hucasil has really good accuracy. So it's not technically true. But again, this is a massive overgeneralization, just to give you an idea of what hunters in general do. And then it says they're suitable for beginners. I agree with that to some degree. Hunter is quite easy in terms of, particularly early game, you do just walk up to things and smack them. It's really not that hard. Later on, you do have to think a bit more about your positioning, making sure that you're positioning yourself in areas where you can maximize your damage output, but also keeping yourself safe. Because you're right up close to enemies, it is quite easy to get surrounded by enemies, particularly in the high difficulties. So you do need to have kind of some spatial awareness with Hunter. But for the lower difficulties when you first start, you won't really have that issue because the enemies move quite slow anyway. So if we then move on to Ranger, it says proficient with guns, Rangers have excellent accuracy that allows them to hit from a distance, but lack attack power, suitable for mid-level players. Ranger is a really weird one. So Ranger, I would say almost more than any other class, is very gear dependent. The advantage is that a lot of the gear that they quote unquote need to be good later on isn't that expensive to get. You can trade for it quite cheaply. But you know, guns like Frozen Shooter, Spread Needle are invaluable later on. Generally they do have quite low attack power, but again this isn't completely accurate because Raycast does have really high attack power. So again, it is quite a generalization overall, but Rangers, I think, particularly early on, maybe do require a little bit more skill than Hunter, because you can exploit the range advantage no problem because the enemies are so slow, it'll take them ages to get to you. But the main issue you do have with low-level Ranger, and I mean very low level, is their attack power is low generally. I think even with Raycast, their attack power seems to scale better at a bit higher level. I don't know if that's actually true, but it feels that way. I've been leveling them on recently and it kind of feels like their attack power scales a bit better at a higher level. So just be aware that you're probably not going to be doing a lot of damage at low level with Ranger. The payoff is that if you do get a Ranger to higher level, they are incredibly strong in pretty much every area. Finally, if we move on to Force, it says proficient with techniques, which again, for anyone not familiar, techniques are the so-called magic in PSO. Forces are excellent as support. Their powerful abilities make up for their low HP, suitable for advanced level players. Now this, the advanced level players bit, I personally I don't feel like it takes a huge amount more skill to play Force, but it does rely a lot on having technique discs leveled. At low level, your techniques are really not very good. They only really get good at higher level. Similarly, you do have not much health at all really on any Force. They are quite low, so they are less tolerant of making mistakes. Honestly though, the main issue with running a Force, if you're just getting into PSO, I will typically always say, play whatever class you want to, but I would really recommend, if you're coming into PSO for the very, very first time, I would probably steer clear of a Force for your first character. And the main reason for that is because funding a Force as your first character is quite hard. Because what you'll find is you'll burn out of TP very quickly. And you'll either go through a lot of mana fluids, which will cost you to replace, or you'll be going back to the medical center constantly. Now, later on, it becomes a non-issue because, you know, by selling armors and shields, you make a lot of money. You'll be able to easily afford your fluids. And then at endgame, there's gear that cuts your TP cost and makes it even easier. And honestly, at endgame, you've got so much TP anyway that it doesn't matter. But at low level with Force, it can be a bit of a struggle sometimes. If you're just starting out with your first character as a Force, sometimes you will find that any money that you're making will just instantly go into recovering your fluids, and you won't actually be able to buy anything else because you're just spending all your money on fluids. So it can be a bit of a struggle sometimes. So if you are coming to PSO for the very first time, I personally would recommend starting with either a Hunter or a Ranger. And then you can always pick up a Force a bit later on once you've got a bit of backup money. Because again, you can trade money between characters anyway, so maybe get a bit of a fund built up for your Force. Again though, if you do want to run a Force as your first character, go for it. You know, they are the kind of class where some people will just gravitate towards playing Force a lot more, and that's totally fine. Just be aware that it might be quite difficult for a first character though. So next, we've covered the kind of class archetype, so let's get into each individual class now. So you can see there are 12 in total. If you're playing the Dreamcast version, this will be 9. Just to make a point on that, this guide mainly relates to GameCube, Xbox, and Blueburst. The characters are a little bit different in terms of stats and everything in Dreamcast, so don't pay too much attention to this if you're playing Dreamcast version. But if you're playing one of the more recent versions, and I realise by saying recent, we're still talking 20 years old. But if you're playing GameCube, Xbox, or Blueburst, this should apply to you. So on these versions, you'll have 12 characters. So if we go back to Hunter, you can see we've got individual character classes. So the first one is Humor. Now, again, for anyone who's just getting into PSO for the first time, one thing that might throw you off is the terminology that PSO uses for character naming. Once you get used to it, it's not too bad and it's quite easy to remember, but there is a method in the madness to it. So the way it works is you can see this character is called Humor. So the first letters you can see in this menu at the left here. For some reason they don't do it here, but here you can see the HU is capitalized. And then if we go back to ranges, you can see the RA is capitalized, and for force the FO is capitalized. So HU basically means hunter, RA means ranger, FO means force. Then the non-capitalized part, the lowercase bit here, this refers to the character's race and gender. So there are a few options. So you have Ma, like this one here, and also for Raymar and Formar. They are male human. So a Humor is a, as it says here, hunter human male. If we go to a Raymar, ranger human male. If we go to a Formar, force human male. So Ma just means male human basically. Similarly, Mal is female human. So Formal is force human female. And Raymal is ranger human female. Then, if we go back to hunters, we have New World. So New World is a female Newman, which are the ones with the Elfies if you've never played Phantasy Star. So Hugh New World is a hunter Newman female. And similarly, for New World is a force Newman female. Then the male version of a Newman is a Neum, which we only have full Neum for male Newmans, but Neum means male Newman. And then finally for casts, which are the robots or the androids, you have Cast, which is a male android, and Casil is a female android. So Hugh Cast is a male android hunter. Hugh Casil is a female android hunter. Ray Cast is a ranger male android. Ray Casil is a female android ranger. And there are no cast forces. Unlike previous Phantasy Stars, casts in this game cannot cast techs. So if we go to the individual character classes, so first one we have is Humor, and it says excels in close range combat, has the most balanced growth potential, has some recovery and attack techniques. So Humor, as it says, does get some access to techniques. They are generally up to about level 15. You have some very limited support techniques in terms of, I believe on Humor, I think on Humor you have, if I remember correctly, I think you have level 15 Jelin and Zalo, which are like debuffs for enemies, but you can't buff yourself. Humor it's a weird one because with the Humor kind of being the poster boy of PSO, so to speak, I think a lot of people get kind of noob trapped into playing Humor because they think it's going to be like the easy beginner class. Humor honestly is, in my opinion, is one of the harder hunters to play, because you don't have the massive attack power of a Hucast, you don't have the trap utility of any of the androids, and you don't have the techniques or the evade of something like Hunuel. So for me, Humor is probably one of the harder classes to play, honestly. It says it has a balanced growth potential. I guess it does, but there are quite a few disadvantages to playing it. That said, a high level Humor will still do a ton of damage, so if you want to go with the Humor, by all means go for it. Then we have Hugh Newell. So Hugh Newell is, the way I see Hugh Newell is kind of like a frontline support melee. So your primary job is doing melee damage because you are a hunter, but you do have pretty capable techniques as well, so you have access to level 20 techniques with Hugh Newell. And I tend to find that these work very, very well as like almost like a backup force, honestly. So they have easily strong enough rester to, to prove useful as an asset to a party. You can keep people alive pretty easily with rester. You have decent buffs, decent debuffs. Not as good as a force, but you are a really good sort of stand-in if a force isn't available, while still doing respectable melee damage as well. That said, you probably are going to be doing some of the lowest melee damage. it's either going to be Uniwell or Hucasil that does the least. I honestly can't remember if the level 20 buffs take Uniwell damage over Hucasil or not, but it's probably close. So if you want that ability to sort of switch backwards and forwards between being frontline melee and also throwing out heals and keeping your party alive, Uniwell might be a good class for you. Uniwell's also really good solo, because you've got a class that is really good for support, so you've got good rester, you've got level 7 anti to get rid of statuses, you've got good buffs, good debuffs, and you've still got hunter strength and okay HP as well. Because of that, it makes them quite a solid class for solo. There are some areas that are quite difficult with the Uniwell, but generally they're quite good solo. Next, you have Hucast. Hucast appeals to people who like very big numbers. So Hucast is basically a ton of health, ton of attack power, not a whole lot else. You do have traps which are really useful, but Hucast is basically just an absolute monster and will just mow things down through sheer damage. So if that's a playstyle you want to do, if you just want to go in and just absolutely destroy everything with huge damage numbers, Hucast is the class to play. There's not really a whole lot else to say on Hucast. Just big numbers. Hucasil it's a bit of a weird class, honestly. So Hucasil is slightly stronger than Uniwell for raw attack power. She does have really high evade and very good accuracy, actually, as I mentioned earlier. So she's quite good at using special attacks because she's got the accuracy to land them a bit easier. It also gives us some good ranged options as well. I do find Hucasil quite an awkward class to play though, because they do have quite low defense. Their health isn't fantastic. And I just personally, to me at least, I don't know if anyone else agrees with me on this, but to me, I kind of feel like Hucasil just feels like a worse Hucast. I know there are some advantages to having the extra accuracy and everything, but I think for me, I just can't see many advantages to playing Hucasil over Hucast. I know there's some really niche things you can do with Hucasil, like one-shotting one of the phases on the F4 boss because of the evade by using one of the photon blasts, but outside of that, I don't think there's a massive amount of utility for Hucasil. That said, in a party, you're still going to be good because you can still bring traps, and that helps solo as well. But I think for solo, I'd probably say that Hucast is probably an easier time overall, just because of the raw damage that you've got. But if you like the sort of archetype of, the, cool ninja that, nothing can really hit very easily, then Hucasil is probably the class you want to go with if you're into that kind of, that kind of aesthetic. I suppose there is quite a big difference between these two. Hucast is basically like the Berserker class, I guess. They are incredibly strong, loads of health, not particularly accurate though. And then Hucasil is nowhere near as strong, but doesn't get hit very much and has really good accuracy. So it depends on the playstyle you want to go with. If we then move to ranges, so Raymar. It says, excels in range combat, has the most balanced set of abilities and the highest accuracy potential, has some recovery and attack techniques. So similar to Humar, so you would assume that Raymar is not good, because we've established that Humar is not brilliant. Raymar is actually really good. So first thing is, it does mention it here, they have the highest accuracy potential, so Raymar has the highest accuracy of any class in the game. Later on, they do also get, they have relatively okay attack power, their health's pretty good. They have pretty nice stats overall, honestly. They do get access to Shifter and D-Band for buffs. It's only level 15, but they do get it. But they don't get debuffs, so it's kind of the opposite of Humor. But honestly, I personally find that having the buffs is better than having the debuffs if you have to choose between one of the two. Simple reason is because with debuffs, you have to cast them on every enemy spawn, which is way more TP intensive. Whereas for buffs, you just cast them on yourself and then recast them when they run out. Yeah, I mean, honestly, any of these ranges will be incredibly good once you put some time into them. Once you've got some of the sort of staple ranger gear, again, which is not particularly hard to get, ranges are incredibly busted in PSO. If we then go to Raymar, so Raymar have low HP, but their high mental strength compensates for it by providing strong attack techniques to support them in range combat. I would say that description is not great. because it is honestly very rare you use attack techniques with a Remal. I struggle to think of many situations you would choose to use attack techniques with a Remal. The only time I can think of it is maybe using Rabata to kind of crowd control spawns, but even then, it's not very often. Main benefit of having the techniques is, much like Hunuel, you have level 20 techniques for support as well. So you have level 20 buffs, level 20 debuffs, which is really good. You've got a decent rester, so again, you can kind of fulfill that like party support role like Hunuel does. The only difference is that you're also doing it from range. Yes, you do less damage than a Hunuel, but you've got the ability to use some of these broken range weapons like Frozen Shooter, Spread Needle, S-rank needles and so on later on. Admittedly, that's going to be high level stuff later on. In early game, you're not going to be really using that kind of stuff, but later on, you do get that massive support ability through those weapons. Remal is incredibly strong, and again, is a very good solo class. Then we go to Raycast, the chunky boy. So Raycasts have the greatest attack power potential out of the ranger classes, unable to use techniques but can use traps. So again, Raycast is basically a walking tank. They have tons of health. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe they have the highest health of any class in the game. They have a lot of attack power. They actually have more attack power than most of the hunters. I know they have less than Hucast, and I think they have slightly less than Humar, but they definitely have more attack power than Hunuel and Hucasil. So when you're combining that kind of attack power with range weapons, Raycast can be incredibly destructive. It is a very, very strong class. You've also got the ability to use traps for crowd control, so these are brilliant for not only for support, like offensive support through traps, but also just for clearing enemies as well, because they are incredibly strong. Again, you probably won't notice this as much at lower level, but as you level them up more, you'll start to notice how strong they start getting. So yeah, very, very good class. Only thing I would say is maybe not one of the best classes for solo. I think for me, androids tend to struggle a little bit more solo. Traps are fantastic, don't get me wrong, but sometimes in solo, just having the ability to use text and rester can be really useful. But generally, any ranger is incredibly strong, and Raycast is no exception. And I know Raycasts can solo fine as well. It's just that there might be some classes that can do it a bit easier in some areas. If we then go to Raycasil, Raycasils have the greatest defensive power potential out of the ranger classes, unable to use techniques but can use traps. Raycasil, to an extent, kind of suffers from a similar problem to Hucasil, in that to play, it does kind of just feel like a worse Raycast. You're basically a Raycast that you still have a lot of health. Again, the way that Raycasil health works is at low level you probably won't notice the health much, but as you level up more and more, you'll notice the health starting to get very, very high, and they end up with an absolute ton of health just behind Raycast. So they're very, very tanky. Adding to that tankiness is the fact they also have really high defense as well. So they are a very, very defensive class. Unfortunately, that does come at the cost of not having much attack power. So Raycasil is quite weak in terms of damage. Again, if you're using things like charge mechs and things like that, you can kind of mitigate that low attack power. But just be aware of that if you are going for Raycasil, that they do kind of suffer a little bit from the low attack power. But again, just to reiterate, any ranger in PSO is ridiculously broken. I can't really stress how broken rangers are. So finally, we move on to forces. So forces are an interesting one because if you can compare them to like other kind of MMOs or anything like that, if you take sort of a typical mage archetype in MMO, you typically have your different roles. So you've typically got things like white mages, black mages, and so on. And there's kind of that theme with PSO. So first of all, with Fomar. So with low defensive power and low HP, Fomars are challenging to use. The combination of techniques and quickness in combat makes them unique. The whole quickness in combat thing is really misleading, because it makes you think that they attack faster. The only real benefit you get out of any quickness, so to speak, is that because you're a male forces have a very fast unarmed casting animation. And that's kind of the only benefit I see in regards to quickness in combat, but they certainly don't melee attack any faster. So I don't know why they've written that. It's a very weird wording. It could be something that's lost in translation, but yeah, don't think that they attack faster than any other class, because they don't. So Format is quite a strange class, and it's probably one of the harder ones to use for a new player. So they're kind of what I describe as a hybrid class. Yes, you will be using offensive techs, because you are a force, you do really decent damage with those offensive techs. Yes, you can support really well because you've got level 30 techs, so you can support pretty well. But Format also has the ability to use melee weapons pretty effectively, and to a lesser extent some range weapons. You can use things like charge Vulcans. Now, Format does have terrible accuracy, so that is a real problem you will have to work around, whether that's by using a high dex mag to get around the accuracy, or you could even go with like a pure tech build if you wanted to. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, because I think Format does benefit from using it more as a hybrid class, but it is an option if you want to play that way. Then we go to Formal. So Formal is kind of similar to Format in that she, again, is a bit of a hybrid and can effectively use melee weapons and some range weapons. Again, her accuracy is pretty terrible, so again, you're going to have to work around that. The difference between Format and Formal, though, is that Format tends to gravitate more towards attack techniques, whereas Formal tends to gravitate more towards support. So she gets boosts to things like her support tech range, so a lot of her support techs will hit double range, which is really useful. She does get an attack boost to Grant, which is nice, but apart from that, you're not getting any boost to any of your fire, ice, or lightning techniques. So typically, I find a lot of Formals will usually run primarily supporting the team and then busting out things like Excalibur or Vivienne or Charge Vulcans to help provide damage. To be honest, they almost play, in my opinion at least, they almost play kind of similar to Hunewell, but with a slight more focus towards techs. Again, they are quite a strange class, but again, probably one of the more complicated classes to play. So maybe not ideal for first class, but again, if you want to try a Formal for your first character, go for it. Next, we move on to Phonium. So it says, Phoniums are well balanced and excel in numerous techniques. They distinguish themselves with their powerful attack techniques. The easiest way to describe Phonium is a Black Mage. So Phonium excels in just blowing everything up with techniques. They get a lot of boosts to some of the most useful attack techniques in the game. So things like Gifoy, Gizonde, Gibata, Rafoy, Razonde, Rabata. Basically, Phonium just nukes everything. They do have some ability to use melee and range, so I know that Phonium can technically use things like Excalibur, but I would say that generally you're going to focus more on casting. They can support, again, you do have level 30 support techniques. The downside with Phonium is that you don't really get any boost to any of your support techniques, so your rest will be normal range, your buffs will be normal range. So you will have to be a bit closer to your other party members to do those buffs and heals. But the trade-off with that is that you then get access to these crazy boosts on a lot of your attack techniques, so you're just going to be nuking everything with a Phonium. So if you just want to blast everything with, loads of flashy attack techniques, Phonium is probably the class you want to play. And then finally we have Phonuel. So it says, Phonuels have limited combat skills, but excel in both attack and support techniques. They have the highest mental strength and TP potential of any class. So it can seem quite confusing when you read this description sometimes, because we've established that Phonium is good for attack techniques, but now we're saying Phonuel is good for attack techniques as well. Difference is that, first of all, the boosts to attack techniques that Phonuel gets are different techniques to Phonium. So while Phonium is getting the boosts to your Gitex and your Ratex, which is like your mid-level and high-level techniques, Phonuel gets a boost to your basic level techniques, and they also get a boost to Megid as well, that lets it pierce enemies. They also do get some boost to support as well, so they do get access to double Resta range, which is nice, and double anti-range. They don't get a boost to their buff ranges for Shifter and D-Band, so you will have to be a bit closer for those, but you can work around that. Phonuel kind of plays like... It's almost like a hybrid between Formal and Phonium, so can you nuke with a Phoniewell? Yes, you can, definitely. You won't do as much damage as a Phonium because you don't have the innate boosts to some of your techniques, but they still do very good damage because they've got so much mental strength. Again, Phoniewell mental strength is the highest in the game. So while Phonium has really good mental strength and those boosts, Phoniewell just has raw mental strength. So you are still going to do really nice damage. Now, yes, if you're comparing DPS 1-to-1 with a Phonium is going to do more damage than a Phoniewell typically, because they can stack more and more boosts. Phoniewell still has really, really strong techniques, but also has much better support. So if you want to play a little bit more of a hybrid and you want to, nuke everything, but also be really good support for your team, then Phoniewell is probably a good choice for you. The big downside of Phoniewell is that, as it says, they have what it terms as limited combat skills. I would describe that as almost no combat skills. Phoniewell has incredibly low attack power. They can't use a lot of the gear for melee in the game because they're just too weak for it. The accuracy is okay. They can get some mileage out of some range weapons like Bringer's Rifle. But typically you're going to be mainly using text with a Phoniewell because they're just not that great at anything else. That does limit them in some areas, particularly in multiplayer. In multiplayer, a lot of the enemies have much higher technique resistances, and if your only strong attacks is through techniques, then you are going to be very, very limited in multiplayer. I tend to find that in multiplayer, a Phoniewell tends to just operate as a support force, which they can do really well. I mean, 4-Mile is technically the designated support force because they get boosted pretty much everything in regards to support techniques. The difference is, though, is that Phoniewell has way, way, way more mental strength. So things like your Rester, for example, your Rester will heal a lot more with a Phoniewell. So there are advantages to playing both. 4-Mile is nice because if you're in a technique resistant area, you can swap out to a melee weapon while still providing support. Phoniewell, you are kind of locked into techniques, so just be aware of that if you do play Phoniewell. So it's kind of hard to put designated roles on things. I mean, again, Phonium is definitely kind of the black mage class. I guess 4-Mile is mostly more towards white mage. I guess, she is more of a support force, but she does have that ability to just bust out melee weapons as well, so she does have some options. So yeah, that's kind of a basic breakdown. There is a lot more information on each of these classes, so again, I have done individual class guides that go into the absolute nitty-gritty of each individual class. It will cover what your stats are like at low level, high level. It will cover all the different boosts that you get and any other things you need to know, because there is a lot of hidden things in the game doesn't tell you. Quick example of that is that a lot of people don't know when they play PSO that Newman characters have innate TP regeneration when they're standing still, and casts have innate HP regeneration. The game, as far as I'm aware, doesn't tell you this. It's not particularly useful, but it is there. So I hope that's been relatively useful. I know that when you come into PSO for the first time, it can be quite difficult to pick a class. I think particularly if you're coming from a later Phantasy Star game, such as NGS, you're probably familiar with Hunter, Ranger, Force because those classes do exist in later games. But then when you've got these individual character classes, that's where it gets more confusing in PSO, and that's where a lot of people start to trip up. And the last thing you want to do is pick a class that doesn't really appeal to your playstyle. So hopefully that's been relatively useful. Again, I would encourage you to check out either my guides or other people's guides for individual classes, because they will go into a more detailed breakdown of what each class actually does. But I hope it's been relatively useful for a general overview. If you do have any questions on the individual classes of PSO, or if you want any advice as a new player, feel free to leave questions or anything in the comments. I will try and answer what I can. I'm a firm believer in trying to support people who are new to the game and trying to get them up to speed and trying to help them out wherever I can, because I realise that PSO doesn't explain a lot. It is an old game, it is a bit janky, and there is a lot of things the game just doesn't tell you that can be quite off-putting as a new player. So if I can help with any of that, I will. So yeah, if you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please consider either liking, subscribing, or joining as a member on YouTube. You can also follow or sub over on my Twitch channel, which is SectionSkyly, where I do 2 streams a week. I have an X and a Bluesky that are both SectionSkyly, and I also have a Discord channel you can join as well, which there'll be a link to in the description as well. So feel free to join us over there. So whatever you're doing, hope you have a good week, and I will see you next time.